our students. So we are delighted to have him here today. And Trevor McKenzie's also in the audience, so that's very cool. Thank you, Trevor, too. And I wanted to just make two quick announcements for Thinking School South Africa to everybody else who is as a participant, is just to say that we are committed to continuing to give you this kind of service, being there to support you as you in more of a thoughtful, explicit approach to developing great young thinkers and problem solvers and creators of wonderful new things. And we are a nonprofit organization, so it's something that we have, it's quite a high priority for us that we keep to be funded. And one of those initiatives at the moment is we do have a Go Get Funding crowdfunding initiative, but part of that whole campaign is that we are offering whole schools an amazing professional development offer. So if you haven't heard about that, please contact us. We will support you to do online professional development with your whole staff. And if you register by the 15th of October, it's only 10,000 Rand for your whole staff, and you can use that until the end of March. So do look out for that. And the other big news, everybody's asking what's happening about the TSSA Roadshow in February. And I want to assure you that yes, it is happening. We are obviously going to be doing things differently. And you will have the opportunity to participate in an online conference. And we also think that there will be the opportunity for limited numbers in social distancing, conferencing in the major centers. So in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be sending you out more information about that. So just to assure you, yes, it is on, and it might just be done a little bit differently. So Guy, I want to thank you so much for just being here with us, for your support. Guy was meant to be conducting a masterclass on learning power in June, and then we all know that COVID came along. So we were just chatting now that those plans have, they're still there. We're still going to
very good, very good. I will be there sometime.
We will definitely do this together. We'll have to see when that will happen. And Trevor McKenzie is also going to be coming to South Africa and would be available for a shared conferencing, but also for professional development for schools. And we will keep you posted on that score as well. So thank you, both of you gentlemen, for your support of the work we're doing here in South Africa.
Not at all, it's a pleasure.
Your time. So if you want to start, let's do that. Please, everybody, use the question box for two things. One, any special requests you have of TSSA, particularly for the roadshow, something is a burning desire of yours that we need to cover when we have our conferencing. But also throughout, if you can please post comments and questions that we're going to collect for Guy to feed back to him so that we can have more of a discussion about the key factors that he, ignites for us. So let's make this interactive. Thank you.
Okay, we're ready to go?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, very good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm, as Jane said, I should have been with you in South Africa in June for the ICOT conference and for some of the workshops, masterclasses I was going to be doing. And I'm really sorry that that didn't happen. So I hope this electronic fireside chat will work okay. I'm not extremely skilled at doing these things. But we have a wizard in the shape of Dan who hopefully will keep everything ticking over smoothly. So I wanted to share some ideas with you about what goes on in regular classrooms and the kinds of things that I'm thinking about, and I hope that they will mesh with the kinds of things that you're thinking about. Now, you're part of the Thinking Schools South Africa setup, so I imagine you're all very keen on thinking. So my request of you for the next hour is that you really put your thinking hats on and bring your thinkingness to bear, and engage critically and thoughtfully with some of the things that I will want to share with you. Some of them, I mean, one of the judgments that you could be making as you go along is the way I often find myself responding when I'm sitting listening to someone is, how much of this seems to be very familiar, and I don't really know, I don't need to be told this stuff again, and how much of it seems kind of way off the scale and maybe works in some parallel universe, but certainly wouldn't play out in my classroom or with my kids or the parents or the colleagues that I have at school, and how much of it falls in between those two extremes, which is it's not everything that I automatically do and think already, and it's not so far out of reach that I couldn't ever imagine myself doing it. So the mindset that I like to have when I'm in your shoes is to be looking for things that go into what I call the maybe basket. Oh yeah, that's interesting, or that connects, or that sounds plausible, or I don't always do that, but maybe I could do a little bit more, or maybe there's another angle on that I could insert into my classroom. Because what I'm calling the learning power approach is a kind of slowly, like the dynamics of it is for teachers who are interested in slowly, relentlessly developing their practice. Not people who want some kind of magic bullet or to be spoon-fed the right way of doing it, or what best practice is, or something like that, but people who are constantly reflecting, imagining, experimenting, critiquing, thinking about what they're doing. And what I would hope to do is to be able to kind of feed in to that. So lots of questions, please. We probably won't have time to deal with all of them, but if you're anything like me, just the act of formulating your questions will be supportive of your own thinking. What's familiar? What sounds wacky? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What do you feel excited by, or bored by, or possibly even threatened by in what I'm saying? So be alive to your own reactiveness. I'm doing a lot of work in my role as a working cognitive scientist at the moment about what's called embodied cognition, which is the vital importance. It's like a sort of new branch of science, which some of you will be familiar with, which is about the vital importance of our being aware of and tuned in to what's going on in our bodies as well as our minds when we're thinking. So be embodied and be aware of when you're sitting forward, when you're sitting back, when you're feeling engaged, when you're not feeling engaged, and so on, because all of that is part and parcel of the thinking process. We might come back to that a little bit later on. So I'm interested in learning, and I'm interested in thinking. For me, learning is a slightly broader notion than thinking. Learning is about imagining, it's about concentrating, it's about talking, it's about being organized, it's about creating your own supportive ecology and infrastructure as a learner. And thinking plays an enormously important part within that process. But for me, this is just a personal preference with my use of words. For me, learning is a kind of more encompassing and also more embodied. It includes kinds of learnings which are physical and practical, which are not intellectual. I'm a great supporter of design, technology, arts and crafts in school. I think they require and develop at least as much learning power and at least as much intelligence as the more high status subjects in school, like maths and science and English and so on. So I'm very interested in how we can bring thinking into everything that we do in school, across thinking and learning, across the board. So this is going to be about what goes on in your classrooms. I'm making the assumption that all of you, or almost all of you, are practicing teachers, and who are interested in reflecting about what is it that we're teaching and what is it that they're learning. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about that. Perhaps maybe the first 20 or 30 minutes of this will be setting up what I think is the right way of thinking about how to engage with thinking and learning. And then hopefully for more than the last half of this talk will be practical examples of little tweaks to our practice, which add up to a growingly powerful incubator of thinking and learning confidence and expertise in our students, so that as they engage with the material that we want them to learn and we want them to think about, so they are also expanding and stretching and strengthening their own capacities and their own attitudes towards thinking and learning. Because I think, and the research shows, that the kinds of mindsets that we help children develop in school are more precious legacies of their time in school than the grades or the specific knowledge which they acquired. So I'm very concerned about how we engage with those deeper and more transferable skills and attitudes, which will have a lasting effect, hopefully a lasting beneficial effect on the success, the confidence, and the impact that the young people in school today will have on the growing prosperity and the growing awareness of what's going on in South Africa and in the wider world. So I wanted to start with an image, the way I think about what's going on in classrooms. And I think about it like this. I think that there are three kinds of learning going on in classrooms all the time, and that it's like they're different layers of learning that are happening, and we as teachers need to be aware of all of these three layers of learning if we're going to be at our most effective when we engage with students. So there's one layer of learning which is the most familiar one. It's to do with the development of knowledge and comprehension, the transmission of knowledge, the subject matter of what's going on in school. We're very familiar with that layer. Then there's a layer which is to do with the development of particularly intellectual or epistemic skills and literacies, how we go about thinking about what we know and what we're learning. And then there's another level which is to do with these broader, more general, and people use all kinds of different languages to describe what's going on at this layer. Attitude, you'll be familiar with them. Attitudes, dispositions, thinking skills, non-cognitive skills, 21st century skills, habits of mind, all kinds of ways that people are increasingly trying to get a handle on what's going on at this other level. And I think of this, my simple image is to think of this as like three layers of flow in a river. This little image is supposed to represent a cross-section of a river. So on the surface, you have the knowledge and the comprehension, little packets of information, bits of language and bits of science and bits of history and bits of geography and bits of business studies, all floating past, very visible and quite fast moving and quite fast changing, easy to see, easy to talk about, easy to schedule, if you like, in our lives as teachers. Then below the surface of the river, a little bit further down, there are these skills and literacies. They're still fairly visible. We're used to talking about them, particularly we're used to talking about the literacies that we call literary literacy and numerical literacy or numeracy. But also increasingly, I'm sure in South Africa, as everywhere else, we're interested in helping children develop their visual literacies, their graphical literacies, their emotional literacies, and so on, the skill base. But down at the bottom of the river, this is how I see it, are these attitudes and dispositions. They're harder to see. If you've ever stood with a friend on a bridge over a river and she spots some fish and she says, look, see the fish in the river, and you look down and you can't see them for a while. She can see them and says, yes, there they are, and you can't see them. And it takes a while for you to be able to penetrate, to get your vision to penetrate down into the bottom of the river. And then you say, oh yeah, I see the fish. So these attitudes and dispositions and mindsets are like that. They're down the bottom of the river, and also down the bottom of the river, things change more slowly. Things move more slowly, but it doesn't mean they're less important. On the contrary, it's the big fish that live down the bottom of the river. And those are the ones which we're after as teachers. So my assumption now is that something's going on at each of these levels all the time in every classroom, whether we know it or not as teachers, whether we intend it or not. So you can't say, it's not accurate to say, I just teach maths. No, you're also teaching ways of thinking about maths. You're also teaching ways of thinking about yourself as a learner. You're also teaching either a growth mindset or a fixed mindset by the way you construct your classroom. So I think all of us are waking up to the fact that we need to be conscious of what we're doing, what's going on. As we're teaching maths, I'm going to skip over to a next slide now. What are we teaching in addition to maths? Are we teaching fractions plus expanding children's ability to think for themselves, to come up with fresh ideas, to try and solve a problem? Are we teaching them to be good experimenters, or are we teaching them to add fractions in a way that also makes them increasingly fearful about making mistakes? That's our choice in the classroom. Nobody mandates that for us, but we're always, wherever we are, by the way we configure our classrooms, we're somewhere on that continuum. We're having an impact down at the bottom of the river. You can teach history in a way that encourages, strengthens children's critical thinking. Why did that happen? What was going on at the time? How do we know this is accurate? Or in the old-fashioned way in which I was taught history at school, you can teach history plus credulity, history plus an unquestioning attitude towards the information that's coming your way. It's our choice. Which of those do we want? You can even be using the same old history textbook, but in one classroom, you might be presenting the textbook as if it were, excuse me, as if it were the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as if it couldn't be questioned. There's no possibility. The idea is never surfaced in the classroom that the textbook might be wrong, that the textbook might be written by someone from a particular cultural perspective, that it might be saturated with all kinds of value judgments. That's never raised, it's never mentioned. So if we treat the textbook in that way, we are inevitably, without meaning to, or often without knowing to, we're encouraging an attitude of credulity, aren't we? But you could equally well, in your classroom, get the children in pairs to look at a few pages of the textbook and see what they think they could plausibly infer about the cultural perspective of the textbook writer. They'd see if you could get them to spot assertions which were being passed off as if they were self-evident, or opinions being presented as if they were facts. You could begin to work in that way with any group of children in any school. Or you could treat history plus empathy, plus using historical events to try and develop young people's ability to imaginatively project themselves into worlds that are very different, lives that are very different from their own. On the right-hand side of my slide, the top picture shows you some boys, they're in year 7 in a school in Wales in the UK, who are doing a bit of writing in a history lesson. They've been studying a period in history, in our history, which we call the Tudors, and now they're writing about an event or an episode that they've just been thinking about in their classroom through the eyes of 3 different people. What would that have been like? What would it have felt like? What would have been going on for you if you had been Elizabeth I? And now write another paragraph as if you had been Mary, Queen of Scots, and now write another paragraph as if you were Lord Burleigh, the Machiavellian Lord Chancellor in the Tudor court. Now we're using that, the subject matter of the history lesson, as, if you like, an exercise machine that is developing these 12, 13-year-old boys, developing their ability to try and put themselves in the shoes of someone who lived in very different times and places. And if they're encouraged to do that, they'll gain a deeper understanding of history, maybe a greater tolerance of different perspectives and different points of view. Something different will be going on down at the bottom of the river, even though the classroom looks very familiar and the same old textbook is being used. So you get the idea. You can do a science lesson on magnets, which encourages the development of curiosity, of coming up with your own ideas, of developing your own hypotheses. Or you could teach them in a way that encourages passivity, and I don't need to think, because at the end of the lesson, the teacher will tell me the right answers, will tell me what to think. So why should I bother? You could teach reading. This has been a big issue in the UK, in a way that also cultivates the pleasure in reading. And lots of teachers do that. But some teachers in the past have taught reading in a way that develops an aversion to reading, that makes it drudgery, and that makes it something that's just imposed on you, that's difficult, that you feel inadequate at, which you can't get your head around. So that's the choice we have, really. Let me go back to my previous slide. I can do that. The choice we have is not whether we're going to do anything down at the bottom of the river where these thinking dispositions, learning dispositions are being cultivated. We don't have that choice. We are agents, we are active players necessarily about what's going on down there. The choice we have is about what is going on down there. Which of those dispositions? Are we encouraging independence of mind? Are we encouraging imagination? Are we encouraging creativity? Are we encouraging criticality and skepticism? Or are we encouraging passivity, docility, compliance, fear of making mistakes, unadventurousness, unimaginativeness? Because without meaning to, lots of teachers have done that. That's what teachers have been. It's been like a sort of toxic side effect of traditional schooling, which teachers, I mean, none of us are bad people, but sometimes we've just been a bit blind to, we haven't been looking at those fish down at the bottom of the river and wondering what the fish are and what they're up to and what effect we're having on the growth and development of those fish. So all of us in our classrooms, just like education as a whole, are making value judgments. We're deciding that it will be better if children were more independent-minded or more critical thinkers than if they were passive and compliant and docile. That's a value choice. We're making decisions about what knowledge, what is it that children need to know. So at each of these levels, we are agents of education. Should we be teaching about slavery? Should we be teaching about democracy? Should we be teaching about global heating? Should we be having heated discussions about Greta Thunberg and whether she's a good thing or a bad thing? Should we be teaching about fake news? Or should we be teaching about antiquated scientific theories like the solar system model of the atom or the difference between ionic and covalent bonding? We have to make choices about these things, and some of these choices are choices that we are able to make as individual teachers. What literacies are we going to teach? But most importantly, what attitudes and what habits of mind are we going to be cultivating by the way we set up our classrooms? So a teacher needs 3 skill sets, if you like, one for each of these 3 different layers. At the level of transmitting knowledge and building comprehension, we need to know our stuff. We need to be good at explaining. We need to be good at asking diagnostic questions, as assessment for learning or formative assessment tells us we should be doing. At the level of developing skills and literacies, well, you develop skills through activity, don't you? Through practicing, through training. So we need to be very mindful about the kinds of feedback that we give. Dylan Wiliam, I don't know if Dylan Wiliam is a common name in the educational world in South Africa, but he's done a lot of work about the way in which we give feedback and the kinds of practice that we encourage in our classrooms. And down at the bottom of the river, what is it that we do which is going to either fatten those big fish down at the bottom of the river, or which is going to neglect them and let them be chased away by other fish which are not going to stand you in such good stead for the rest of your life? What are those things? And those are the essence, if you like, of the learning power approach. What are all the different things that we can do in our classrooms that cumulatively impact on what's going on down at layer 3? And there's lots of work going on around the world trying very successfully actually to identify what those ingredients are of our classrooms which make a difference, which create a kind of undertow, to shift the metaphor, between an undertow that is dragging children towards being extrinsically motivated and worrying about what's going to be on the exam and being dependent upon their teacher to help them and guide them and rescue them, or that contrary undertow, which is just gradually, progressively, relentlessly drawing children towards becoming more independent, more keen to take charge of their own learning, not to be passive, not to be wheeled around, not to sit there waiting to be fed by the teacher. You know you're making progress when, for example, you set the class a tricky problem to think about, maybe in pairs or threes, and you give them 5 or 10 minutes to think about it, to see how well they can make progress with this problem. At the end of 10 minutes, you draw them all back together and you say to them, okay, very good. Now, would you like me to tell you the answer? And all the class shout out, they're horrified. They say, no, 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 miss. No, sir. Give us another 2 or 3 minutes. We think we're nearly there. We're making progress. We think we're getting there. Then you know you've got a teaching and learning culture in your classroom, don't you? Rather than that passive, docile, please feed me, please tell me what the right answer is type of culture. So as I say, a lot of this is going on around the world, and some of these people you'll be very familiar with the work of some of these people. People like Ron Berger and the work of the Expeditionary Learning Schools, or EL education. They're a shining example of how to do what I'm calling the learning power approach well. Ron Ritchard, has he been to South Africa? and his work on developing what he calls cultures of thinking is very much at the center of this developing world. Of course, the wonderful Art Costa and Benna Kalik, and their people who are working with the Habits of Mind framework. There's Michael Fullan and what he calls new pedagogies for deep learning. So this is not what I'm talking about today. My own work, which I used to call Building Learning Power. But what I'm talking about today is not anybody's individual little brand. We're not just talking about James Nottingham's Learning Pit or Ron Ritchhart's thinking routines. We're talking about a school of thought. We're talking about a philosophy, a curriculum, a pedagogy, which is designed explicitly not only to give the youngsters the knowledge they need and the literacies they need, but more consciously, more deliberately, more systematically, and more effectively to cultivate those habits of mind or learning dispositions down at the bottom of the river, which are the gold dust. They are the truly valuable legacies of schooling. I forget who it was, maybe Winston Churchill, who said, education is what's left after you've forgotten everything you were taught at school. And that's where the real essence of education is. So this is what's going on around the world at the moment. Okay, before I progress, maybe just take 30 seconds. I'll shut up for a while, and just maybe you could jot down a question for the chat board. Just what's going on in your head? What sorts of reactions have you been having to this broad brush, high level picture before we get down to the nitty gritty, and see what questions bubble up in your mind that you might like to throw back at me, or you might like to take away and worry away at a little bit further after this session is over. So I'll just give you 30 seconds or so, just a little bit of thinking time. Okay, anything coming up, Jane, that it would be useful to respond to at this point?
Guy, I'm getting some communication coming through to me about, there are quite a few people listening who are working with things like the habits of mind and the, thinking routines and being conscious about developing thinking skills in their teaching and learning. So I think the two things I'm getting, one is just that this idea of you as a cognitive scientist, it's really interesting for us to think about bodies as well as minds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That sounds really interesting to know a little bit more about. And the other thing is always at top of the priority list for our teachers is, how can I take this further? I'm already doing this, but I walk away today with one practical thing that I could do to deepen it.
Sure.
We have had James Nottingham out here as well before.
Mm-hmm.
We know about the Learning Pit, and that's a really lovely framework. We're working as a thinking school, which is about how do we make this a sustainable way we do school,
Mm-hmm.
which does a lot to culture. But we're never there. It's a journey, you know. And
yeah, absolutely.
It's useful to have. Okay, so now there's another step you can take.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
We haven't really spoken much about bodies, and I really like that. An opportunity we should be. I mean, in other work that I do in my other, just parts of my life, I really, that resonates really well with me. That we're not just brains on legs, we do.
Yes. Well, the wonderful the wonderful Sir Ken Robinson, who's just sadly passed away, used to talk about the idea that your body was just the way of getting your mind to a meeting. And there is real science now, a lot of it. I mean, I've written one of my recent books is called Intelligence in the Flesh, which is like a summary of this scientific work. I mean, just give you one very simple little example. You know, I mean, we could talk for 3 hours about this. How sensitive people are to what's going on inside their bodies. For example, how accurately they can track their heart rate without putting their finger on a pulse is a predictor of the quality of their real life decision making.
Wow.
Now, just let that sink in for a moment. Stronger our interoceptive awareness is the technical phrase, our body sense, our ability to sense what's going on in our heart, in our stomach, in our kidneys, in our muscles, in our nerves. All of those things feed in to the decision-making process. And lots of successful businessmen and politicians and artists will tell you that they consult, you know, they are sensitive. They've cultivated a sensitivity to those bodily feelings and promptings, those intuitions, those inklings that we have are not necessarily right, but they are informative. They need to be part of the intelligent mix, if you like, of our lives. Now, so we could be cultivating interoceptive awareness in school. Where does that happen? How are you using that in your science lessons? You could be using it through mindfulness. You could be developing, having little moments to stop and be mindful and sink into your body, as I tried to do at the beginning of this session. Is PE just a matter of learning to run faster and jump higher, or scrummage more strongly than everybody else? Or could it also embrace yoga and Tai Chi and other disciplines that are designed to develop interoceptive awareness, and so on? So that's just one tiny little pocket of what's going on here. Maybe my next book, but one, will be about the body in education, but it hasn't got written yet. So
it's really good.
So thank you very much for that, Jane. So now let me go on. One of the things that we need to be really clear about and precise about is, what is it that we're after? What are the big fish down at the bottom of the river? So this slide is an attempt to capture that. It's like, we can't be very good at cultivating things if we don't know what it is we're trying to cultivate. If we're broad and vague about it, if we just use vague expressions like critical thinking or creative thinking or fulfilling potential or growth mindset. So we need to keep, one of the ways of pushing deeper, one of your questions, Jane, was, how do I go further with this, is to keep developing the precision of the vocabulary with which we think about that bottom layer. The more precise we are, the easier it is to start thinking about ways in which we could be effective at helping things to develop. How are we going to develop adventurousness and curiosity? Children who are up for a challenge, who don't shy away, who don't go to pieces, who don't immediately think they're stupid if they can't do something quickly. How are we going to develop determination, and the fashionable word is buoyancy, tolerance for making mistakes? How am I going to teach maths so that I'm building that capacity? How am I going to develop collaborativeness and chattiness in the club? What kinds of talk? What amount of student-to-student conversation are we going to have? And how do I coach students so that they're going to get better and better at being good discussants? Developing reflectiveness and self-awareness. What kind of reflective writing am I developing in my students? Am I developing their ability to understand that we write for all different kinds of purposes, and some of them are private and reflective? They're not there to be marked or assessed by someone else. What about developing focus and mindfulness? Well, the mindfulness, the kind of fashion for mindfulness has probably come to South Africa. But is it being treated only within a kind of well-being framework where it often is. It's like it's about emotional awareness and it's about being calm and so on? Or are you also exploring the cognitive benefits of mindfulness? And how are we imbuing those in lessons? Developing imaginativeness and playfulness. So what specifically are we going to do? We know that good ideas pop into your head when you're relaxed and dreamy. We all know that. We get our best ideas when we're falling asleep, when we're in the shower, when we're not, under pressure. So how are we creating time for that in our classrooms? Are we creating those, just stop, relax, see what bubbles up kinds of moments? Are we teaching our children to value, to create those moments in their lives and to value them? Perfectly easy to do. Nothing technical, nothing expensive, nothing problematic about that, but very easy. Are we teaching them to be rigorous and careful, to be good evaluators, to be good reflectors on their own process, to develop what Ron Berger calls that ethic of excellence, that culture of craftsmanship, that attitude of, I want it to be the best thing it could be? Are we developing their own ability to be self-organized, to learn how to be methodical, how to create their own learning ecology at home? What do you populate your world in order to support you as a powerful learner? So if we don't, the more precision we have with that vocabulary and the more we can use it in the classroom, we'll come back to this in a minute, the more it becomes part of the linguistic milieu, the water in which our students are swimming like the fish in the river. The more we can do that, the more likely we are to be successful. But I know lots of schools that say they're interested in cultivating growth mindset, but that's the only language they have. They haven't developed a rich, variegated language for talking about what growth mindset means and how it feels, and the nuances of different words like perseverance, determination, stickability, tenacity. We have a rich vocabulary, buoyancy, bouncing back from mistakes, a rich vocabulary for talking about these things. So that's quite an important thing. I think I'll skip over that slide in the interest of time. So I've already started to introduce, to kind of throw in some of these things that we could be thinking about. What could we be doing to develop those qualities? And the different aspects of the classroom, I've just divided quite simply into these, where we need to create an atmosphere of psychological safety. How do we do that? This isn't about safeguarding in the physical sense. It's about a room in which everybody feels that it's absolutely fine to come up with a silly idea, to make a half-baked contribution, to have a go at something and not be able to do it or get it wrong. An awful lot of teachers, without meaning to, create a different kind of culture through their reaction, through the silence with which they greet a wrong answer in the classroom. All of these things contribute to the undertow. Then we need to populate that environment with challenging activities. This is James Nottingham territory. And get students working together to wrestle, to grapple with those challenges. So we need to be thinking about how we build student sophistication as discussants, as sounding boards for each other, as critics for each other. How we do that methodically at the same time as we're teaching maths or science or history or English. What about our own language? That's very important, and I've just been illustrating that. The degrees of responsibility and independence that we allow in the classroom. Are we taking every opportunity to encourage independence? To invite, for example, to invite students to come up, to get together in little groups, to brainstorm for 2 or 3 minutes. This is a really tricky idea, this concept that we're trying to get our heads around. What would be a good way of practicing it? In other words, are we continually looking for ways in which they can learn how to participate in creating the learning environment in the classroom, not just to be recipients of the learning environment, but to be the fashionable word is co-constructors, co-creators of the learning environment in the classroom. Even the decor and the layout, have we thought that through? Do you have a desk in your classroom? Why? Where is it in the classroom? What difference would it make if for 3 weeks you moved your desk from the front of the classroom to the back of the classroom? What impact would that have? Have you played with that? Have you played with moving the tables around? Do you create your own version of a Harkness table by putting all the tables to the side and putting all the chairs in a circle before you have a discussion? Have you experimented with that to find out what different mood it makes in the classroom? How much of you are you taking for granted of the traditional methodology, the traditional language of the classroom, and how much are you creatively and inventively playing with that? So let's have a look. We'll go through a few of these things. Bear in mind as we go through this, this is the traditional pentagram. As you're looking for your takeaways from today, these are the 5 categories of the takeaways. What am I going to keep doing? What am I going to do more of? What am I going to do less of? What am I going to start doing? And perhaps most difficult, but equally important, what am I going to stop doing in the classroom? This is just a way of kind of keeping track of what's going on in your classroom. So creating an atmosphere of psychological safety, how do we do that? We normalize mistakes, don't we? One way of doing that is when we're teaching a poem in an English lesson, show the poet's rough work. There are wonderful examples that you can download off the internet of the drafts of T.S. Eliot's poems or Ted Hughes's poems, or I'm afraid I can't immediately come up with a famous South African poet, but I'm sure you could get that material. Show, just make it normal that, you know, you don't get it right first time. Nobody who ever did anything worthwhile got it right first time. Do we take as many opportunities as we could to share our own difficulties, to normalize difficulty in the classroom by being perfectly open about the things that we're learning, that we're finding it, or if we're finding difficult, the mistakes, the words that we still can't spell, age 73 or 45 or whatever it might be. Very, very, very easy to do. All of this feeds an environment within which all the children in the class think, maybe I'm not just stupid then. Maybe this is part and parcel of what it means to be a learner. One very important thing is talking explicitly about the distinction between learning mode and performance mode in the classroom. When you're in learning mode, you're trying to get better at something, and that means making mistakes. It means working at the limits of your competence. It means having a go, pitching in, trying things out, discussing, arguing, disagreeing. That's the environment when you're in learning mode. When you're in performance mode, you're doing everything you can to look good, right? It's like the difference between a circus troupe when they're in the tent on their own on a rainy Thursday morning, practicing a new movement on the trapeze. They're behaving quite differently from the way they behave under the bright lights in front of 500 people in the circus or in the concert hall in the evening. Which of those do we create in our classroom? But if by our own actions we create a performative environment, we are retarding learning. Have we really taken that lesson to heart? Have we really thought that through? Have we made sure that we've removed everything we possibly can in our own behavior, which might inadvertently lead children to think they're in a performative environment rather than a learning environment? Do you talk to your children about this? About the difference between what footballers do when they're in a training session and what they do when they're in a high stakes match? They behave quite differently. So which do you want your classroom to be? And most importantly, get your children to make sure that you tell them whether you want them to be in learning mode or performance mode, so that they don't get stuck in performance mode the whole time. That's the critical thing. Everybody needs to be in performance mode. Sometimes we need to look as good as we can look. When you're taking your driving test, when you're playing your piano piece in the school concert at the end of term, when you're sitting a high stakes exam, you need to be as good as you can be. You need to look good, but not all the time. That's a place where you go when you need to be. It's not a place to live. It's not a place to camp. So are we sure that we've got that right, that we're not contributing to creating that performative environment? So which of those are you going to try in your whatever you teach? How could you find what little piece of this could you take away? What could you do a little bit more of? What could you do a little bit less of? What do you maybe not realize? What could you start doing to help to build that environment? We've got a picture of oh, I've forgotten her name. What's the name of that singer?
Rihanna.
Rihanna, thank you very much indeed. But I was reading the other day about Rihanna. You know, when Rihanna's on stage and doing a concert, she's in performance mode. After she comes off exhausted, within 5 or 10 minutes, she's back in her dressing room and she gets out her iPad and she's noting all the little things that she noticed, like maybe that brass riff could have been a bit tighter, or maybe the dancers, maybe we could have changed the dance move a little bit. 9 o'clock the following morning, the whole crew are back together again, thinking and talking about how they can improve. They're back in learning mode. Performance mode is what she does between 8:30 and 10:30 at night. Outside that, she's back in learning mode. And that's what we need to be doing with our children the whole time. So what's the little grain of gold that you could take out from that? What could you tweak tomorrow in your classroom? Building challenging activities. Let's take that. So are you concerned about the amount of genuine learning that's going on in your classroom? In other words, when children are in the learning zone, there are 3 zones they can be in. Some of you will use like this simple little tricks, like the traffic lights system, the 3 colored mugs, and they all have a red mug and a yellow mug and a green mug that sit inside each other. And when they're working on their own, doing something or other, every so often you just say, stop, show me your traffic lights. And they show you the color that corresponds to how they're engaging with the learning. If you see a sea of red mugs, red cups, it means they're all finding this too difficult. They don't know how to get a handle on it. They're not learning anything because they can't grasp it. They have nothing to start with. So then you need to intervene. You get feedback quickly of what you need to do. If you see a sea of green cups, you know you've erred in the opposite direction. It's like they're all finding it easy peasy. They could do this in their sleep. So they're not learning anything either. But if you see a sea of orange cups in the middle, the yellow or orange cups, like the traffic light, that means we're finding this tricky. It's making us think, but we're okay, right? That's the learning zone. That's where, isn't it? That's where learning happens. So are you getting quick feedback from the class? Because that will enable you to maximize the amount of learning that's going on in your classroom. Not just it's a safe place to learn, but now because I'm feeling safe, I'm willing to be stretched. And that means stretching my resilience, stretching my thinking, stretching my imagining, stretching my ability to articulate what it is I find difficult, stretching my ability to try and understand what my learning buddy is saying, where they think they've got a good idea. Do you start lessons with a grapple problem, as the EL education schools very often do? A grapple problem is something that tees students up, that builds on the previous lesson, but that none of them can do easily. So they have a go at it and they might fail. And then they talk to each other in pairs about what they tried and how it worked. And then they get round their table and share their strategies. And then you eavesdrop on those conversations, and then you can be very precise in your intervention because you know what their insights are, what they know already, where their difficulties are, and what their misconceptions are. If you haven't got your ear to the ground as you're wandering around listening to those conversations, you can't fine-tune your teaching. And if you don't fine-tune your teaching, you're not optimizing learning in your classroom. I used to be involved in teacher training, and many's the time when I'd sit down with a student at the end of a lesson and say, you know, well, how do you think that went? And they would say rather blandly and smugly, they say, well, I think most of them got it. And they haven't a bloody clue whether most of them got it. Just 3 or 4 of the bright kids who knew it already put their hands up and answered the question correctly. And the teacher heaves a sigh of relief and moves on. That's lazy teaching. That's shoddy teaching. If you do that, if you haven't if you're not using these little techniques in the classroom that enable you to be a good coach, enable you to stay close to where your learners are so that you can help them move on. You're probably all familiar with the Chile challenges. You create not just one, but a diet of different degrees of difficulty. And you may be inclined as an old-fashioned teacher, if there are any of those in the room, to decide, you know, who needs the softest challenge and who could go for a hardest challenge. But no, what you do is build up your students' capacity to choose the right level of challenge for themselves, to decide whether they're going to go for the number 4 Chile challenge. They're called the Chile challenges because when you go to a Thai restaurant, there are little group numbers of chilies which determine how hot the dishes are. So are you using little techniques like that? Are we making sure that kids are up for a challenge and that we then present the challenge and that we keep monitoring the level of challenge in the classroom? Building Learning Power schools have a little technique, a little display that they call the riskometer, where the students just stick there. They have, this is in primary schools, they all, it looks like a big thermometer, and it's got a strip of Velcro up the middle, and the kids all have their own photos with a bit of Velcro on the back, and they choose where they're going to stick their photo up the riskometer in terms of how far out they're going to go with the learning task that they're going to choose or they're going to create for themselves in the lesson. We're going to practice multiplication, but you can choose how big the numbers are that you're going to multiply together. Whoa, Barry and Elena have decided that they're going to try and multiply a 4-digit number by a 2-digit number. Whew, never tried that before. Let's put our pictures right up the top of the riskometer and see if we can do it. No great shame if we can't. If we bit off more than we can chew, people are always doing that. You just move your picture down a little bit and try and get back into the orange zone. If you discover you're in the red zone, move it back down again. So are we maximizing that? What about students talking and writing? Do you get students to create their own anchor charts? An anchor chart is a big display on the wall full of hints and prompts and reminders of what we say when we're working in our small groups that contribute to that group being a really powerful learning environment, learning power incubator. I agree because, I've changed my mind because. Do you say, could you, can you, cause? I think that's a good point. Are we coaching the students to become better, more skillful, more respectful, more thoughtful, more penetrating discussants in the classroom? Some schools do, some schools don't. Right? Are you missing a trick? But the important thing is to involve the children, to involve your students in discussing about discussion. Get them to stop in the middle of a discussion and say, just hold on a minute, press the pause button. Just want you to spend 2 minutes, like just share your thoughts about how good a group are we being. Okay, off you go. Do we do that regularly? Are we working as coaches of what's going on down at the bottom of the river? Or are we so busy skating over the more superficial levels that we forget to do that? The picture on this slide is of groups of older students who are doing a routine called speed dating, which is where they're giving each other feedback on pieces of work. They're learning how to give and take feedback to each other, how to give feedback in a way that is precise, respectful, practical, and specific. They're learning to get better at being someone else's coach. And on the other side, they're learning to get better at accepting critique as being helpful and formative, rather than getting upset and feeling that they have been criticized. Because if you lapse into that, you're not going to be a very fast learner. So you get the spirit of this. This isn't about magic bullets. It isn't about cute little bells and whistles. It's not necessarily about, you know, celebrating some things where I might disagree with James Nottingham about, you know, the learning pit. The learning pit's great, but it's one little tool that contributes to the vibe in the classroom. It's not the be all and the end all. Growth mindset is not the be all and the end all. The Harkness table, the whatever your favorite little thing is, it's an ingredient that helps to make the cake, that helps to build the atmosphere in the classroom within which everybody is feeling keen to be a learner and proud that they're getting better at it, week by week, month by month, year by year. So are you increasing the time for exploratory talk? Are you getting students to create anchor charts? When was the last time you decided that you were going to have 20 minutes in a lesson and use it as a training course in giving and taking peer feedback? Because you'll get better results if you do that. If you invest in that, they'll do better on the tests. What about your own language? As you wander around the classroom, do you have that vocabulary on the slide with the green letters, with the green words that I showed you earlier? Are you using that? You're being very adventurous. I love the way that group, where you didn't even notice that distraction, did you? The great imagining going on in that group. I love the way you were using diagrams and drawings to develop your ideas with that, and so on. Are we just populating the environment with that language? One very specific thing is to cut out using the word work. I don't know, in England, teachers just used to use the word work a lot in the classroom. Imagine a sped up film of a classroom and the teacher's going, get on with your work, get back to your work, get down to your work. Have you finished your work? How's your work coming on? Now, work's not a good word to use in the classroom. Work is a performative word. It's not a learning word. So shift your vocabulary. How did you do that? What was tricky about that? That's a learning language. What would help you learn that better? What have you learned by doing that? Right? Rather than, have you finished your work? Work is something you get through as quickly as possible for a reward, for your pay packet at the end of the week, or for a nice comment from the teacher. That's not learning, is it? Right? Work is getting it done. Learning is stopping and thinking and wondering and puzzling about what you're doing because you want to understand it more deeply. What about responsibility and independence? This is just the cover of a book, A New Design for Learning, created by a group of 40 students from secondary students from across 7 schools who were tasked by their schools to go out and find the best knowledge they could about how to make their school more powerful learning environments. Why not? The Harris Students' Commission on Learning. Do you have that in your school? Have you missed the trick in terms of involving the students in being your eyes and ears in the classroom, in thinking about who at a local university could we email to find out if they're doing interesting research on the role of feedback in learning? Do you have student lesson observers in your classroom? Students who are monitoring the nature of the learning that's going on and feeding that back to the rest of the class from time to time. Lots of English schools do, probably lots of South African schools do. But is that something that's already in your yes, done that basket? Or is it something that's in your don't think we could ever do that basket? Or is it something that goes in to your maybe basket? And what about the decor and the layout? What do the posters, what do the walls of the classroom say? Do you have lots of examples of people who would be heroes, role models, singers, footballers, rugby players, whatever, talking about their learning journeys, talking about their learning struggles? Famous basketball player, I always muddle him up, it's either Michael Jackson or Michael Johnson or somebody or other, saying, I got as good as I am because I made so many mistakes. Right? They're different, aren't they? Michael Jackson and Michael Johnson, I think they are. What about displaying students' draft work on the walls of the classroom, not just the glossy finished product, but creating an environment within which they're proud to show you their improvement, not just their achievement? That's a big shift in a classroom. Or you might even rearrange the furniture. So there's a whole lot of things there. So I'm just going to give you the time now. You can come back with some questions. We've got about another, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So just have a little bit of think. I'll go quiet again. So what's out of all that, all those things? What are the things that have been affirming? Yep, keep doing. What are the things you maybe could do a little bit more of in your classroom? Maybe things you should try and do less of. Or I must try, and I like the thing that he said about work. So I'm going to try and use the word work less in the classroom. Are there things you could try and stop doing in the classroom? Maybe there are some new ideas in there that you could start doing in the classroom. So what's in your take home? What's in your party bag that you're going to take home? And what are the questions that you'd like to fire back at me, just to get a clarification so you could go away and be a more thoughtful, experimenting, innovative teacher tomorrow? Okay, so when you're ready, let's have a party time.
Can I start the party?
I can't see, by the way, on my screen, I don't know if it's my fault, but I can't see any of the chat that's going on.
Okay.
So you'll have to relay it to me, Jane.
Sure. So there's some things on the common screen, and I've got some comments people are sending to me directly. So the one is, how does this manifest in a normal day? There's some lovely ideas. And this idea of also being more explicit about a learning versus a performance mode. I don't think we make that explicit enough. And also this idea of coaching students more explicitly to become thinking coaches for each other. There's feedback going on, and there are ways and strategies that children are being given the task of giving and receiving feedback. There's a sense that maybe we could do that more deeply, and the idea of students monitoring more carefully just the what one observes as a coach.
Great.
The riskometer, certainly Durban, we do eat a lot of very hot food, so this whole is a great one. And I think there's a lot of this going on, and some, I think we need to challenge ourselves if we think, oh, we've done this. It's actually not ever done. Say, how can we make
that's one of the enemies of innovation, is like we've ticked that box.
Yes.
You know, we've done growth mindset. What next? Right? I bet
Yes.
you
Oh, that-
have. I bet you haven't done growth mindset. Not the
Yeah.
way Carol Dweck really meant it.
Yes, and it's not about doing it; it's about deepening it and taking it always to the next level.
Yeah, it's like
Yep.
the thing about learning and performance. Let me say a little bit more about that.
Mm.
There's a very good TED talk by a man called Eduardo Briceño, who is actually, I don't know if he still is, but up until a year or so ago, he was the sort of CEO of the Carol Dweck spin-out organization called, I think it's called MindWorks.
Yes.
And he has a really good TED talk, which is called How to Get Better at Things You Care About. And I watched that TED talk, and he sowed in me the seeds of this idea. I've sort of developed it and tweaked it a bit. But if you want to go back to the source, to the horse's mouth, have a look at that TED talk. So basically, learning mode and performance mode are two different, they're like different mindsets, but they're not fixed mindsets. They're induced by the context. We can flip. Just as I was saying about Beyonce or those circus actors, no, not Beyonce, what was her name? Rihanna.
Yeah.
And the circus acrobats and so on. Like we all flip between learning mode and performance mode in our everyday lives. So when we're in learning mode, mistakes are inevitable. We're working at our limit. We welcome feedback. We're honest with ourselves about how well we're doing. When we're in performance mode, our goal is to succeed and impress. So we tend to cover up our mistakes. Feedback is unwelcome. Cheating becomes a possibility, becomes a rational possibility when you're in performance mode, because your job is to create the appearance of success, right? Because you're after the applause, you're after the outcome, right? So you behave entirely differently in those two modes. So let's talk to the children about that. Let's find a way, you know, as I've been trying to do, which is age appropriate, to get them to understand that they're football heroes, that, you know, Harry Kane or Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo are behaving quite differently behind the scenes from the way you see them behaving on the television on Saturday night, right? And get them thinking and talking about that. What does it feel like to be in performance mode, to feel like you're being judged rather than being supported by the people around you, right? That's one of the big things that's emerging from all of these different initiatives around the world, is the importance of sharing this information with children. Bring it to the surface. Make it part of the public conversation in the classroom, so you normalize it. Like the stuff about giving and taking feedback. You know, when someone gives you critique on your essay, you have a choice. You can either go into emotionally upset mode, or you can go into cognitively thoughtful mode, right? Emotionally upset means I feel criticized and undermined and I'm feeling inadequate. Cognitively thoughtful mode is, hey, that's a really good idea. That would help me do a better draft. That would help me do it better next time. So you can talk to 5-year-olds about that, can't you? Right? And then you could talk to them about, if you were a really tough little learner, you wouldn't go into the emotionally upset mode. You wouldn't say, my Messi's been mean to me. He said he didn't like my picture, right? You wouldn't do that. You'd say, hey, Timmy, thanks. That's great. It's a really good idea. I'm going to have another go now. So how do we move kids? So give them that information, give them that language, and then see if they can see that they could change, they could progress. There's a little technique that a lot of people use called what is it? Try three before, no, I'm thinking of something else.
3 before me.
2 stars and a wish.
That is.
Right? When kids are giving feedback to each other, it's like you have to say 2 nice things before you give them the critical thing. Right? And it's been all around the planet, 2 stars. There's different versions of it, 2 stars and a wish. So talk to the kids about, why do you need the 2 stars before you get the wish? Do you think you could manage with 1 star? Or do you need to be plumped up and reassured that you're a lovable, worthwhile human being before that awful critical thing comes along? So I've been in schools where the teachers have talked to that. The kids started with 2 stars and a wish. Two weeks later, they said to the teacher, let's see if we can manage with 1 star. Let's save time. Let's cut out one of the stars. And 2 weeks after that, they all got together and they said, oh, bugger the stars. Let's just go straight for the wish. Right? Because now we're becoming more robust little learners. Like, that's learning power in action, isn't it? Yeah, not just someone taught me this technique, which I as a teacher introduced slavishly into the classroom, but I discuss it and use it inventively and creatively with the children. They participate, they co-create. So I think the learning and performance thing, and it's a much better way of thinking about growth and fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is just when you've got stuck in performance mode. Right? Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you've developed a bad habit. Or you've learned to assume that every classroom you walk into is going to be a room in which you're going to be judged if you make a mistake. So we can challenge that assumption and we can shift it. The nice thing is they're both useful. We need learning mode and performance mode. The question is, are you in the right one for the right moment? That's a much more, it's very accessible, it's very gettable, but it avoids some of the problems that people have run into with growth mindset. A lot of people have developed a bit of a fixed mindset about growth mindset, haven't they? Right? It's become a thing, right? Rather than an insight that we can share with the kids. So I think this thing, I get more and more excited about this. I think this thing about whatever age the children are, whatever ability they are, you can begin to take them into your confidence, to excite them about the possibility that this is a training ground. This is a coaching session for your mind in this room. And that involves pushing yourself. You don't get to be Cristiano Ronaldo or Faf de Klerk or whoever by, sitting on your backside feeling good about yourself. You get it by making lots of mistakes, by going out there and struggling and wrestling. And once kids get that idea, you get much more engagement in the classroom. Of course you do. Rather than feeling if I participate, I'll be judged. There's a group of people saying, no, me. I remember going to a school in Hungary where children queued up to have their mistakes worked through and discussed on the blackboard in front of the rest of the classroom. It was an honor. It was a valuable learning experience that they all wanted to have. Do you have that in all your schools? Or do you have, I'd rather die than do that? It would be a humiliating experience rather than an energizing and growth promoting experience. Was there anything else? Oh, the peer coaching thing. Yeah, again, talk to kids about that, the idea of, we could get upset or we could not. So what could we do to get better at giving and taking feedback? It's like, I love this idea of the classroom as a mind gym. It's where we go to have our mental muscles stretched. Because it's safe and exciting to be like that. Yeah, and because you understand that this is getting you ready to be a grown-up. You can't just say, oh, I don't do things like that. I don't want to. When you're a grown-up, you're going to have to persevere. You're going to have to be imaginative. You're going to have to collaborate. You're going to have to do all these good things. So let school be a training ground. Let us foreground what's going on at the bottom of the river.
Guy, this is really useful for us, and even for a lot of people who've been consciously working on developing that kind of culture. it's really, it's an opportunity for us to reflect on, how do we really make sure it happens, and that, in a lot of schools recently, schools have been battling with some really difficult things, not only
Sure.
the COVID thing of having to teach differently, and a lot of teachers finding it really difficult to connect with children in the same kind of way, emotionally, and in this way of, of being, making sure that psychological safety is there, and stretching, and it's become a little bit more like work that we have to get through.
Yeah, and we have to kind of resist the temptation to go into that, we just will have to work harder mode.
Absolutely.
Because actually kids get better results more pleasurably and more quickly if you do these things that I've been talking about. This isn't some nice to have. This isn't some optional thing. This isn't about putting at risk the results and the achievement and the grades. It's about being so smart that we can get better grades and better preparation for life all in the same classroom and all at once. And that's the critical thing. And I think you're right, Jane. Your comment is this: a lot of this stuff has been around for a while. What's exciting now is the synergy, the depth, the coherence, the understanding that this is about joining up all these dots. And it's about doing the, it's not waiting for the next magic bullet or the next glossy thing. It's about doing the hard yards of shifting the culture irreversibly, so that in every classroom, in every school, we have this buzz of excitement, of openness and supportiveness and adventurousness. And that takes time and effort and vigilance and hard work. And if you're just chasing the next glossy badge, you won't do it.
I think for us as well, as teachers and leaders in schools, to be very real and vulnerable ourselves. I mean, just some real conversations about difficult things and change, and things like Black Lives Matter. It's had a huge impact on African schools recently, where
interesting.
Previous students have said they haven't felt comfortable, where that had never really been openly. It hadn't been out there in the open. So really tough stuff.
It's sort of Me Too for children as well. It's like, let's make this normal. Let's take the veil off this. Let's not make, I'm feeling stupid, I must be stupid. It's like, if we create a different atmosphere, a different vibe in schools and in classrooms, then I think the sky's the limit, really. This is this last slide I've just put up, is like the work that I and my friends and challengers and colleagues have been doing over the last 4 years, is to try and synthesize these different approaches from around the world. The Michael Fullens and the Ron Berger and the Ron Richard and the James Nottingham and the Guy Claxton, and say, let's try and distill all this and put it together and present it to teachers in a way that is very accessible and very practical. And at the same time, you have in your mind what the big picture is. Again, I think one of the exciting things about this is you can see the golden thread that connects the riskometer to the lifelong learning intention, to the big picture, or the colored cups. It's about a real joined up, coherent image and picture of something that it maybe deserves the title of a 21st century education. So what we've been doing is these 4 books. One is the general overview, which was like the first half of this talk, and then Powering Up Children and Powering Up Students are very practical workbooks for primary and high school teachers respectively. And the last one, which came out just a few months ago, is a book about developing the culture of the whole school. It's a book for school leaders. So we're stopping to have a long breath after having produced these 4 books. There may be more to come, but they're our attempt to say, this isn't owned by anybody. This is in the public domain now, and it has sufficient evidence both from fundamental cognitive science and from outcome research in education, that nobody has any excuse for not taking this seriously now. You can't just say it's a load of psychological waffle, or the parents won't like it, or it'll put the results at risk. We've dealt with all of that, right? There's no way out now. This is the contender for what 21st century education looks like. And I think that's, for me, that's, you know, it's been exciting and a real privilege to be able to be part of this.
Well, Guy, we must really thank you for being part of our community. And there are a lot of comments coming through now, just of thanks to say to you, you know, the analogy of the river, and just helping us become refocused and energized about deeper engagement and upping our riskometer
Great.
ourselves, if we want our students to do that too, and to make that just all more explicit.
Yeah.
And something that I'm particularly passionate about wanting to expand in South Africa is giving more student voice. And we have a couple of schools that have a student drive team that informs and works with teachers and leaders of how do we move forward. And I'm really hoping that that's going to be a hot topic of ours next year, because it's really sincere engagement with students. It's their world as well as ours. And how do we this environment to really be buzzy and full of that stretch, but also that that acceptance and safety. So you've given us a lot of food for thought.
Great. I liked you. What's one last thing? I like your comment about the riskometer. I met someone the other day, and she said, I really loved your idea of the riskometer, and I went back to school and I put one up in my classroom, and I thought, hey, we need one of those in the staff room too.
Of course.
They have a big riskometer in their staff room.
And on your mirror in the morning. These are important conversations. And I also like the way you frame this, that there's no gimmick here, there's no ownership, there's no patent here. This is about how are we collectively going to make a real impact on the culture of the school, but also on our bigger social environment and those students going out and shaking up the world in the right way.
Definitely.
Particularly at this time where and also I know right in the beginning, we spoke about looking at different points of view on things. And I think that's missing in the world at the moment. We have a real duty for the next generation to listen with more empathy to more different points of view, and just not to be so polarized.
Absolutely. And, I mean, a real top priority at the moment is for every school everywhere is to do whatever we can to help students become bullshit proof, because the world is drowning in bullshit at the moment. And it's our job to build. We don't talk blandly about critical thinking. This is a matter of the survival of democracy, to have a populace who are capable of thinking not only creatively, but really critically about the information that comes their way.
Yeah, that's our duty. I think we need to be up to it.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts with you. I hope they've been useful. As you say, it's just, this isn't a whole I don't have a whole new bag of tricks to bring, but it is about doing the hard work now of digging this deep, of getting it broad, of getting buy-in, of building consensus in a school, of making it last, of involving parents, of finding a way of talking to parents that gets their buy-in and their enthusiasm about this as well. wherever they come from, whether they come from a well-to-do family or a township or wherever. It's like, it's our job to make it easy for parents to join in with this. And that's not been true, certainly in English schools traditionally.
Yeah, we haven't done much on that, and it's something we really do need to, and I'm really hoping that we'll find, we're working on some ways, but I hope, you know, we need to just have that real intention.
Absolutely. We need hashtag school lives matter.
Thank you for that. I'd like to also just invite Trevor to respond to this afternoon's I'd just like a couple of comments.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, no, thank you, Jane. And Guy, I'm such a learner when I am blessed to have some time with you, and my notebook is just full. And
Excellent.
I purchased 2 of your books today, finally, you know, having you here and seeing you again. Just so fortunate to hear you speak, Guy, sincerely. And a couple of things that really resonated with me are, you referenced that school of thinking and how your work is housed in a greater kind of collective and push for change. And I deeply appreciate that, you know, to find a home for my work in inquiry that is aligned with something that's much bigger than the little sliver of work that I've produced in my career. So, you know, Michael Fullen, I deeply admire, you know, Art Costa, Dana Kalik, and everyone you referenced. And then you gave me some homework.
Our dear friend Kath Murdoch, I forgot to mention.
Absolutely. And so you've given me some homework, which I think is so helpful to see how I can broaden my language. You know, you reference the importance of language so often throughout our time together. And so I'm looking for that, and not just to deepen my language as a supporter of schools around the world, but to deepen my language for my students. You know, one value that you bring to my learning is, if you want it, coach it, and how important that intentional language is with our learners to create that culture of learning, because it isn't the splash in the pan. This is, the hard work is in the details of how we behave in classrooms and how we speak with kiddos. And as you referenced in the decor, how our rooms look. And there were several things that got me thinking about what I want to bring into my classroom. And one that I hadn't anticipated is I need a traffic light. I need the red light, yellow light, green light. And at first I thought I just printed off, but I actually want a traffic light that I could turn on. So there are lots of takeaways, guys. So I really appreciate being here with you and listening to you. And thank you for deepening my learning.
Not at all. Thank you for joining us. Pleasure to see you again, Trevor.
As always.
And
yes,
thank you everybody who attended this afternoon. It is an afternoon before a holiday in South Africa, and it just shows great intentionality that you've been here. And I really thank everybody for that energy and commitment. And thanks a million. And Trevor and Guy, we're going to pick up some of these discussion points at our roadshow, and we'd like to see some more debate about how do we apply a lot of these principles, and so much for your input today.
Sure, good. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, Jane.
See you next time.
Yeah, next time, sooner rather than later.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye.